Here we go then. 7 points. We'll start with the general election. We have touched on the election with Cornelius and Harry. So Philip, I might throw this over to you. Racing's opportunities is I think the positive way I'd like to start on it, with over 350 new MPs sitting in Westminster. Let's get out and meet them.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and that we've got to sell our story very strongly. That there are 100,000 people in this industry. It's a legacy industry. And that it's vital to the UK. It produces 4 billion of GDP alone and sort of $500 million of tax revenue. So any government is going to look at that. But what we do have to recognise that it's a different audience, and that the now government represent a different audience, and that we must make sure that our house is absolutely in order in every area. Welfare is one specific area.
How are we doing?
Well, I think that we're getting there, but I think that we need to get there faster and sooner. The industry has to recognise that it has a responsibility to fund this, and that every man jack who has any connection with horses whatsoever, from breeders through to owners, through to racecourses who use the product, they must pay their way. But what we need to do is to provide a viable and sensible funding plan and get it done. We've got ROR in place. They need to be the vehicle. We've got the Horse Welfare Board to sit over the top of it. We're in good shape if we've got the energy and that we recognise the urgency.
I mean, we'll just keep this rolling because Cornelius and Harry and I talked about the importance of Lady Starmer being at Sandown Park yesterday quite extensively earlier in the programme. So we'll just keep the clock spinning through that. We ought to talk about the Levy renegotiations, which failed before the election date was called, and they're going to be put back on the table now. What does British racing need to do?
Well, it needs to. I see they put out a slightly sort of defensive statement, the British Horse Racing Authority, this week, saying there'd been numerous meetings with members of the shadow cabinet and the Labour Party already, but they clearly need to be in touch even more with those figures, find the new figures as well, who are going to be some high-profile names, Lawrence Robertson, Philip Davies. Some of those type of people aren't in anymore, so there will be some new Philip Davises and there'll be some new Lawrence Robertsons around to make certain that the case is made exactly as Philip says, really well to them. But this is a time of frustration that things like the levy negotiations, things like the affordability checks have sort of gone on hold. But I can't believe these are such. They're still very important matters, and there are a lot of people in government. I'm sure that they'll get going again pretty soon. What were you going to?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, given what you were saying, Philip, are we getting too hung up on the renegotiation of the levy as a quid pro quo for the recommendations in the white paper? Are we actually getting our knickers in a twist about it too much, or do we just actually need to think bigger?
We've got to think bigger, because the problem is that with the levy, and that as much as 20 million would have been very welcome and is very welcome, it's sticking plaster to deal with the problems that we're facing.
And this was your point, Harry, earlier on. I mean, sometimes racing doesn't think big enough. It's rather conservative, small c, in its aspirations.
That's why it's so inspiring hearing, everything that Philip has said before. I mean, it has to be done. There has to be exactly what Philip's been saying. We just sit where we are. We will see a declining market share. Other sports will benefit, as we know, and we can't let that happen. So these are really key times.
And Philip made the point that there's a new set of people to make contact with, and a different set of people. So clearly there are a lot of Labour members of Parliament who, for the welfare thing, will be really high on the agenda. The hunting thing will be very high on their agenda. I know the point-to-point circuit, which has a direct connection, a stronger connection with national hunt racing than ever, will be very nervous on that front. So it's whether you're dealing with a taxman or you're dealing with someone in business, or you're dealing with this, the lines of communication have to be developed and kept wide open.
There was quite a dramatic moment earlier this week, which was almost over before it began, but it nonetheless represented a pretty significant fissure in the sport when two brands under the Flutter umbrella, Sky Bet and Paddy Power, didn't put Bath, the card at Bath, as part of their offering. Now, later rode back on this, but there was a war of words that developed over a night and a morning, Philip, and it got pretty ugly for a little while and sort of suggestive of some pretty major cracks between ARC, the parent company of Bath, and you know, the biggest bookmaking entity.
Well, I'm going to take a positive out of a negative here. Firstly, it demonstrates quite clearly that the bookmaking industry is looking at racing in a different way. The cost of putting our product into the bookmaking offer is very significant when compared to other sports. It also is clear that there are other markets that have more profit opportunity, and that if we can't see this train coming down the tracks at us, that our revenue is going to be compromised, then this encapsulates it absolutely. And that, you know, okay, so we got over this, but in 2.5 years' time, you're going to be there again. And 2.5 years' time will be coming a bit quicker than you think. And that if we lose another 2 billion of betting revenue, what do you think that the bookmakers' approach to offering racing continuing as a product is likely to be? I know as a retailer that if I had a product that was appearing compromised and past its sell-by date, I might be switching to something else, and switching to something else quite quickly. And that the other concern is that Flutter have now moved the head office to the US, that they're a US-based business, because the US is where the opportunity is. We have got to do everything that we can to secure our sport.
Right, that's what happened this week. Let's talk about the vacancies that are about to abound in horse racing. Martin Stevenson, who's the chief executive of Racecourse Media Group, who is the parent company of Racing TV, he has announced that he will be leaving his position before the end of the year. We know that Nevin Truesdale will be going before the end of the year at the Jockey Club, that Dido Harding starts her tenure at the Jockey Club officially as the new senior steward, the chair, at the end of next week. Charlie Liverton went as the ROA chief executive to be replaced by Louise Norman. There's just Julie Harrington, of course, chief executive of the BHA, Tony Langham, Joe Somers-Smith, Rod Street. It's an enormous exodus. Again, should we sell this as an opportunity for the sport, Harry?
Definitely. Well, we have no choice. These are really important positions, all up for grabs. So
Philip Newton's still there.
Well, thank God. What we just heard, that's fantastic.
Most inspirational speech I've heard from any of them, I think.
It is, and there's got to be time, obviously, trouble, taken to fill these roles, because they are so important for our future. Everyone you've mentioned there is key.
Interestingly, Philip, though, you can articulate your vision from a certain standpoint. How difficult would it have been, say, for Julie Harrington to come on this sofa and articulate that vision to me in those terms without upsetting a whole load of her stakeholders who are all pulling the strings behind the scenes?
I've always thought that the BHA is a really tough gig, because all it tries to do is to compromise, and that compromise actually, in the end of the road, gets you nowhere.
And aren't they supposed to have more leadership ability now?
Yes, but it's Pyrrhic at the very least. I think as far as these vacancies are concerned, Harry's right. We must regard it as opportunity, but what we need to do is to think very carefully about what we want immediately. There is a job to be done for the next 4 years where the industry is restructured, and then there is a job after that. And they're two quite different animals, and that needs to be recognised right from the get-go.
The thing about horse racing is that it has a slight issue on a daily basis, on micro issues, as well as all the macro ones we've been talking about. That very much came to the fore yesterday at Haydock Park, who had to abandon their later round course races, including the Old Newton Cup, because of slippery bends. I think we've now realised that Haydock's not an easy gig, Cornelius.
No, Kirkland Tellwright in retirement will probably have been looking on, thinking, well, I know exactly what Dan Cooper is going through here. Haydock is just an extraordinarily difficult situation. There is a sort of semi-microclimate there. It can be very wet when everywhere else is quite dry, or indeed vice versa. So Haydock, they moved very quickly, Haydock, in order to look at that bend. They tried hard, but there were still further problems, and in the end the meeting had to be abandoned. They've had to put in place a management structure in order that people can get tickets for the future and things like that. Haydock is very, very difficult, and people were very critical of Kirkland Tellwright. But the fact of the matter is that Kirkland had a very difficult job, and now I think people are appreciating that. People called him Kirkland Tellrom and things like that. The fact of the matter is, Haydock is very, very difficult to deal with.
No one wants to be a clerk of the course, do they, Philip?
That's far out of my pay grade.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, all you do is get flack. No one ever goes, "Oh, you've done such a great job."
No, and I have to say that I've cursed them in my time as an owner.
Yeah, too much water, not enough water.
Always never enough water for me.
You need to slow the others down.
Class slow horses.
My horses are only really competitive when the tops of their ears are showing.
Have you got anything coming along?
I've got some nice stuff in the locker, I think.
Okay. Well, who's back this week? Paul and Claire Rooney. I mean, they've had flat horses for a little while now, but of course they had that massive string of jumpers, initially with Donald McCain and then spread around lots of other trainers after they split, and they're back into the jumping game.
And this is significant, because when I heard during the week the Rooneys are going to come back with half a dozen horses and they've spread them between 3 stables, I was honestly thinking that I was going to hear Willie Mullins, Henry de Bromhead and Gordon Elliott, but absolutely not at all. It's the O'Neills, it's Nicky Richards and it's Fergal O'Brien. So one forgets how big that Claire and Paul Rooney were, 8, 9, 10 years ago, when they were having, a huge number of runners, sort of up to nearly 300 runners for 4 or 5 seasons running. One season they had 67 winners in those familiar quartered colours, the blue and the yellow. Then they decided to concentrate on flat racing. But I've always had the feeling that Paul Rooney absolutely loves the jumping, Paul in particular, and Jason Maguire, the Grand National winning jockey, as the racing manager as well. So they are back with some interesting young horses, and hopefully will be racing very soon over jumps. So that's the situation as far as they're concerned. Jason Maguire said they are keen to support British jump racing. There are going to be 6 4-year-olds, they used to have 200 to 300 runners every year. It won't be anything quite like that. But this is a big fillip at a time that jumping could really do with a fillip. This is it.
Excellent. We'll finish this off by a story that appeared earlier this week about mortgage applications, and if you have a betting account and there is money coming out of your bank account to have a bet with whoever it is, and it's registered there, the banks have been refusing people mortgage applications on that basis. You did a bit of digging into this.
Well, it appeared this was a BBC morning daytime programme, and they had an expert on there, and the headline on the social media was, "Even a £10 bet on the Euros could affect mortgage application." Well, actually, the Iona Bain, who was the expert who was interviewed, didn't actually say that, but she said it is something that when mortgage lenders do their due diligence, then one of the things that definitely in her experience that brings up red flags or potential red flags is when they see that money has gone to a bookmaker on a regular basis, maybe not even vast sums of money. And I thought it in itself was just the way the BBC put out the social media. Even a £10 bet on the Euros could affect mortgage applications. She didn't actually say that, but it is an indication of where we are in this particular area.
Well, this is it, and again, it's the way not only racing is perceived, but it's also the way betting is perceived at this moment. And surely we have a responsibility in that regard as well.
We certainly do, and that what you have to recognise is that the way that data is managed these days, and risk profiling, if that they can add another line to it at the bottom of it to ensure that their position is, or a lender's position is protected, they'll do it, and that they won't think of the consequences of it. It's a job that we've got to promote and to sell effectively. We've got a big job in front of us.
And the expression was used in the introduction to the piece, millions are on the brink of addiction. Well, you know, that's a sort of, in a way, a meaningless top line, but equally we know where we are in terms of people's view of gambling.
All right, those were this week's talking points.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.